A CEO saw a single dad at a wedding and whispered, "Stop looking at the bride, look at me." The bride had just walked down the aisle when the CEO noticed the man sitting alone in the last row. His little daughter was asleep against his chest, one tiny hand gripping the collar of his worn shirt. Everyone else was watching the bride. But the CEO wasn't looking at the ceremony anymore. She was looking at him. Then, as the guests rose to applaud, she quietly stepped behind him and whispered something that would change both their lives forever. "Stop looking at the bride, look at me." Before we continue, if you believe that kindness can give people a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Forever. Your support helps these emotional stories reach people who may need them most. His name was Marcus Hale, a 34-year-old single father who had learned to measure life in small victories. Getting his daughter, Nora, dressed without a morning argument was a victory. Making enough breakfast for both of them before work was a victory. Keeping the electricity on another month was a victory. And on this particular Saturday afternoon, simply making it to the wedding without his daughter spilling juice on her dress felt like a miracle. Marcus had never planned on attending the wedding alone. His wife, Serena, had passed away 2 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving him with a 3-year-old daughter and a mountain of responsibilities he never imagined carrying by himself. Serena had been his best friend, his partner, and the person who always believed Marcus could become more than the struggling mechanic he was. Now he worked long hours at a small automobile repair shop. He came home exhausted, cooked simple meals, helped Nora with her homework, washed clothes late at night, and slept whenever life allowed him to. The wedding belonged to Serena's childhood friend, so Marcus had promised he would attend. He borrowed a dark suit from his cousin because buying a new one wasn't possible. The sleeves were slightly too short, and the shoes were several years old, but he polished them until they shined. The wedding took place in a beautiful garden beneath a clear afternoon sky. White flowers lined the aisle, sunlight filtered through tall trees, and expensive cars filled the parking area. Marcus immediately felt out of place. The guests wore designer clothes and expensive watches. He kept checking Nora's dress, making sure she looked perfect. Then the bride appeared. For a few seconds, Marcus forgot everything. She looked beautiful, surrounded by flowers and applause. But his eyes weren't filled with jealousy or longing. They were filled with memories. Serena had once dreamed about a wedding like this. Marcus remembered how she used to describe the dress she would wear, the flowers she wanted, and the little girl she hoped would someday throw petals down the aisle. Nora looked toward the bride and whispered that her mommy would have looked beautiful too. Marcus's heart broke quietly. He lowered his head and wiped away a tear before anyone could see it. But someone did see. Across the garden sat Vivienne Cross, the 38-year-old CEO of Crosswell Holdings. She was known for being brilliant, wealthy, and nearly impossible to impress. Business magazines called her fearless. Employees called her demanding. People who knew her personally called her lonely. Vivienne had attended the wedding because the groom was connected to one of her company's largest clients. She had expected an ordinary afternoon of polite conversation and business networking. Instead, she noticed Marcus. Not because of his suit. Not because he looked handsome. She noticed him because of the way he cared for his daughter. When Nora woke up crying, Marcus immediately picked her up. When she became nervous around the crowd, he whispered reassurance into her ear. When she accidentally dropped a flower, he smiled instead of scolding her. Vivienne watched silently. She had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from her. Marcus appeared to want nothing. During the reception, Marcus stood near the edge of the garden while wealthy guests gathered around the dance floor. He watched the bride and groom dance, then looked away. That was when Vivienne approached him. She stood beside him for several seconds before quietly saying the words that stunned him. "Stop looking at the bride, look at me." Marcus turned toward her, confused. Vivienne smiled gently and told him she wasn't asking him to forget his memories. She was asking him to stop punishing himself for still having a heart. Marcus didn't know what to say. Vivienne admitted that she had noticed him crying earlier. She said she knew what it was like to sit in a crowded room and still feel completely alone. Marcus laughed nervously and told her she probably couldn't understand his life. Vivienne looked toward the enormous mansion beyond the garden and confessed that money had never protected her from loneliness. Her father had built the company she now ran, but after his death, she had spent years proving herself to people who believed she had inherited everything rather than earned it. For the first time that afternoon, Marcus saw something behind the powerful CEO's confidence. Pain. Real pain. Their conversation was interrupted when Nora suddenly became dizzy. Marcus panicked. He picked her up and rushed toward the parking area, but Vivienne followed. They drove Nora to a nearby medical clinic, where doctors explained that she was dehydrated and exhausted but would be fine. Marcus sat beside his sleeping daughter, holding her tiny hand. He whispered that he was sorry he couldn't give her the life she deserved. Vivienne heard him. She didn't offer money. She didn't make promises. She simply told him that Nora didn't need a perfect life. She needed a father who never stopped showing up. Those words broke something inside Marcus. Over the next few weeks, Vivienne and Marcus remained in contact. At first, they spoke about Nora. Then they talked about work, dreams, fears, and the futures they had stopped believing were possible. Vivienne eventually offered Marcus a position managing a new transportation division within her company. He almost refused because he didn't want charity. But Vivienne made it clear that she wasn't giving him a handout. She had watched him work, solve problems, manage people, and remain calm under pressure. She believed he had abilities he had never been given the opportunity to use. Marcus accepted. Months passed. His life began changing, not because Vivienne rescued him, but because someone finally believed in him. Nora started calling Vivienne Miss V. She would draw pictures of the three of them together and proudly place them on Vivienne's office desk. Marcus slowly began smiling again. One afternoon, nearly a year after the wedding, Vivienne took Marcus and Nora back to the same garden. Marcus immediately remembered the day everything changed. Vivienne stood beside him beneath the trees and confessed that she had been afraid that day too. She had been afraid to approach him because she thought he might reject her. But she had realized something important: sometimes the greatest opportunities in life don't arrive as business deals or expensive gifts. Sometimes they arrive as a tired father carrying his sleeping child. Marcus looked at Nora, who was running through the garden chasing butterflies. Then he looked at Vivienne. He finally understood what she had meant at the wedding. She wasn't asking him to look away from the past. She was asking him to look toward the future. And for the first time since Serena's death, Marcus allowed himself to imagine one. Not because he had forgotten the woman he lost, but because he finally understood that loving someone who was gone didn't mean he had to stop living. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people deserve second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Forever. Sometimes one small act of understanding can become the beginning of an entirely new life. And before you leave, I have one special request: comment "I believe in second chances" if you believe that no one should be defined by their hardest chapter. Marcus had once entered that wedding believing he was only a grieving father who didn't belong among wealthy people. He left it with something far more valuable than money: hope. And sometimes, hope is the first doorway to a new life.